And again, I might come up with stuff that may not have any written definitions or anything like that. And for one reason that I think is because I didn't go through them systems. I wasn't taught to think. We pretty much grown up in the travel community learning how to think. And a lot of our experience, our education came from life. It doesn't mean we're stupid. It just means we may not be more educated than the schoolery type people, the people that have an education. That doesn't mean we're not more intelligent, because our intelligence came from real life education. In other words, it came from reality. Most of other educations are constructs that goes back hundreds of years. And we're in a country called Ireland where we have an English education system. So when the English came here a few hundred years ago, they had set up schools all around the place and was to force Irish people to speak the English language. People were hunted down and killed if they were not part of the English process. In other words, changing their Irish mentality into a more constructed English mentality. That was the whole idea of it. And that same process then that happened in America. It happened in Australia. And all the same treatments that happened to Irish travellers also happened to other indigenous groups. Now, the most important thing I could say on that, because I'm not trying to make huge comparisons in terms of who treated worse or better or anything like that, or to take anything away from indigenous groups or ethnic minorities around the world. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is try to understand how we can end racism as opposed to keep fighting something that doesn't exist. So basically what we have is the Irish version, the traveller version of racism. When the English came here, we were well prepared. In other words, we weren't shocked when we seen them first. Some of them were probably our distant cousins. But anyhow, we didn't have that shock to the system. So when they came here, we basically had the same kind of level of military might. In other words, we were as good as fighters as they were. In actual fact, we were much better fighters than they were because we had defeated them for hundreds of years and we kept beating them and sending them home. It was only when England had a new system, I suppose. They were invaded also. The Romans, they had brilliant armies. And then you had the Vikings, who were pretty well-known people. Saxons, you name it. That's who England is. It's not who England always was, but it's what England became. So basically, they brought all that to Ireland, and that changed things. But my point in that is to say that we weren't culturally shocked or any other shock. So when them same white people came to other countries where they never had seen a white person before, that was a huge shock, particularly when they start destroying them and killing their people and their families, and millions, hundreds of millions of people died because of this particular mentality. So we bring it back to Ireland again and say, why are travellers equally the victims of racism? When I say the victims of racism, I mean the construct, the political theory that went into it. Because starting, I suppose, look at it, we go back, travellers were clan people. They were part of an indigenous mentality, culture that belonged to Ireland for thousands of years. That was not broken. It was damaged, it was attacked, and it still is attacked, but it was not broken. So when you hear people talking about Irish history, they're talking about our ancestors. In the same breath and the same mind that we feel it. In other words, if someone told us about complete strangers in different parts of the world and about their history, we would not feel it. But when we hear about old Irish history and the cultures and the traditions, it's like if they were talking about our families in very recent times or even today. The same with Brehon law. Brehon law came from Irish travellers. And again, we weren't always called Irish travellers. Go back far enough, we were just clan people and we were by names and trades and so on and so forth. But it was also a very advanced civilisation. In other words, a very civilised one. I know I might have said this before, but I just worth remembering that when the English colony took over, they had people turn on people. They had white people turn on white people because they started altering their minds through their education systems. In other words, no matter who you were, where you came from, whether you're Irish traveller, African American, if you're Aborigine, First Native, if you go into their system long enough, and a few generations later, you will most certainly be thinking in the exact same terms and mentality and how they see the world as they do. That's the whole process of it. And again, it doesn't even take that long for some people. A couple of hours. But again, it's not a forced thing. If some people accept it, people say, "Oh, I'm okay with this. I live in the system. It's better than nothing." And we're not necessarily fighting the system as such. We're not fighting people. It's not a traveller versus settled. It's a structural thing. It's a mentality thing. Now, if I was to take two people and put them each side of the number 9, one would see a 9 and the other would see a 6. That's perspective. That's a standing point. But when you take the person with the 9, even when you bring them over and show them the 6, they can only still see the 9. No matter where they stand, they see the 9. That is the state. That is the constructed mentality. We can see the 6, the 9, the 8, and the 7, and any other number you want to, for that matter. But when you have a fixed mentality like that, and you refuse to move from it, that filters out, because that is a constructed one that came from a system, an education system. And the education system wasn't just for people's delight to make them wiser, smarter, better. Education systems were designed for smarter workers in the labour force. In other words, they wanted people that would make rich people more richer through profits. That's what the schools were designed for. But when they went through that process, they found it was a great way of controlling the mind. Now, if you think about this, as a child, you go into school, and the teacher tells you to sit down, get in line, what you can't and what you can do, and punishes you. And you go throughout the education system, you get to the point that you're programmed. You're not expected to get out of line. You're not expected to be in the ball corner. And if you take that mentality and you bring it into the employment mentality, you start all over again. So everything that you learned in the education system is brought down to a minimum one more time. And for the purpose of that is to train you to work the systems, or to engineer or maintain the systems. So that's what the education was designed for. So when sometimes we say education, I think of a very industrial, structured education. People who think of education might think of education as some kind of given thing that everybody needs it. But most people don't question where their education even comes from, or what they're even learning, or how they came to those thoughts. Hope I'm not complicating things, or hope I'm talking too fast, or anything like that. It's kind of important stuff, to me at least. I think it is, and I feel it is. I've been trying to test it with a lot of people, but nobody comes near me with it. And there are some people that really do get it. And oddly enough, and not oddly enough, in one way I shouldn't be surprised, travellers believe it's a given. Wonderful traveller activists, highly educated. I said there was nothing new here when I put up a similar type post, and that's perfectly normal, and that's the way it should be. That traveller felt that, seen that. But what I see is to settle people and tell them that their minds are colonised, and it's not that they're bad people. It's not that you're a bad person. You're probably a very good person. Always worth remembering that. It's the mentality. It's like a default. I know I've been a bit chopping and changing here now, but now I'm in the whole mentality zone. But basically, you take that mentality, right, and use like a computer, and it already comes with a pre-installed software, and it turns on and it functions, and it serves a purpose. Now, if you wanted to make that computer do something that it wasn't programmed to do, you create a new program and you install it into that software. And if you wanted to do more, you put another program in. That sounds a bit like the settled mentality education system. It's a case of who gets the education, who gets the best of education. So the people who want to get more profit or align to wealth and stuff like that, they get the best programs to be installed, where everybody else is expected to live on a basic operating system. If it's a Linux, that's perfectly fine. Anyhow, enough of that. I don't want to try to computerize people or anything like that. It's more complicated than that. But yeah, I do a lot of buts now. But yeah, where we are. Yeah, basically, so yeah, the whole traveller dimension, it's the opposite of what settled people mentality. And I say that's settled people. It's not just an Irish thing. If you were to go to South Africa, they tell you it's a white thing. If you go to America, they'll tell you it's a white person. You go to any of these indigenous groups that are outside this particular mentality, they'll tell you it's the white people, it's the Europeans, and they're absolutely categorically right. But when it comes to the Republic of Ireland, well, actually the whole of Ireland at one time, we were still outside of that particular mentality. Even the conquering processes, long before that, we had our own distinct civilization, as I mentioned, our own culture, traditions, poets, musicians, armies, legal system, political system, religious systems, you name it. Advanced 3,000 years ago, that was operating. It was known as the land of saints and the scholars. So that's how we were educated and intelligent. It's when the English system came, it was complete opposite of ours. In the same way we find today with Irish travellers and settled people, we've absolutely see the world completely different at times. Doesn't mean we're from different planets or anything like that. It's a mentality based form. So now we got the two sides are at conflict with one another, and unfortunately, sadly, one particular mentality has dominated huge parts of the world, and still does today, is destroying Irish travellers. The last of the Irish history, that cultural mentality that had survived thousands and thousands of years. In 2019, there's 40,000 of us left, barely clinging on to that mentality. Most of our people die at the age of 65. Most do not make it past the age of 44. Suicide is 7 times higher than the national population or the general population. That's a very unfortunate thing. That's not physical. It's not a result of the Irish state coming out shooting us or beating us up. It's a case of just two different worlds, psychologically different. And one will not accept ours because one was never designed to accept indigenous cultures or their realities. So unfortunately, when Irish travellers go and that mentality is gone, Ireland will never have a history, unfortunately. But at least with this glimmer of hope with Irish travellers, that we can reestablish our history, our identity. And believe it or not, it's one where there's far less violence than you might think, and one where there is no racism, one where people are not judgmental. We need to live a life of humanities, and that's right across the world. Our culture today, oddly enough, has far more in common with Japanese ancient culture, has far more in common with African culture, far more in cultural comparisons with Native Americans, First Natives, African Americans. We're not constructed or resulted as a result of capitalism. Capitalism itself came from imperialism, came from colonization. This is a mentality that was constructed and engineered in Ireland many, many, many years ago. And hopefully we get to the bottom of it. Have a good evening.